Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Explore Everything. Today we're diving into the story of a man who blended crime, glamour, and vision. Bugsy Siegel, the notorious gangster who turned the dusty Nevada desert into a glittering empire. Long before Las Vegas became the entertainment capital of the world, it was a quiet, forgotten place. But Bugsy saw something no one else did, a golden opportunity. From his rise in New York's underworld to his bold venture in building the Flamingo Hotel, Siegel's journey is one of power, betrayal, ambition, and legacy. This is not just the tale of a mobster, it's the story of how one man's daring vision changed American culture forever. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel's story begins in the crowded tenement neighborhoods of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, in the early 20th century. Born on February 28, 1906, to Jewish immigrants from Austria-Hungary, Siegel grew up in a world defined by poverty, discrimination, and survival. His parents, Max and Jenny Siegel, struggled to provide for their 5 children. His father worked long, grueling hours as a poor tailor, and the family lived in a small, cramped apartment with few opportunities to rise out of hardship. Benjamin Bugsy Siegel's story begins in the crowded tenement neighborhoods of Williamsburg, Brooklyn, in the early 20th century. Born on February 28, 1906, to Jewish immigrants from Austria-Hungary, Siegel grew up in a world defined by poverty, discrimination, and survival. His parents, Max and Jenny Siegel, struggled to provide for their 5 children. His father worked long, grueling hours as a poor tailor, and the family lived in a small, cramped apartment with few opportunities to rise out of hardship. In this tough environment, young Ben developed a strong aversion to poverty. Unlike many children in his neighborhood who accepted their lot in life, Siegel refused to be limited by his circumstances. He wanted more: money, power, respect, and a way out of the immigrant struggle. At an early age, he learned that in the streets of Brooklyn, law and order held little sway, and power often belonged to those willing to take it. By the time he was in his early teens, Siegel was already involved in street crime. He joined local gangs and quickly earned a reputation for being fearless and hot-tempered. If someone crossed him or his friends, Siegel didn't hesitate to use violence. This earned him both respect and fear, 2 crucial currencies in the rough neighborhoods of New York at the time. It was during these formative years that Siegel met Meyer Lansky, another young Jewish boy from a similarly poor background. The two bonded almost instantly, not just because they were from the same neighborhood, but because they shared ambition and intelligence that set them apart from ordinary street thugs. Together, they formed a small gang targeting pushcart merchants for protection money. Their method was simple but ruthless. They'd approach small vendors and offer protection from local troublemakers. If the vendor refused, they themselves would cause the trouble, breaking stands, intimidating workers, and making it clear that paying them was the only way to stay safe. This early extortion racket marked Siegel's first steps into organized crime. Unlike many gangsters who acted impulsively, Siegel was strategic. He understood how to leverage fear while maintaining a sense of control. His violent tendencies made him dangerous, but his quick mind made him effective. Even as a teenager, he was known to carry a gun, and there were several reports of him firing at rivals who challenged him. In one incident, he reportedly shot a rival gangster on the street, sending a clear message that he wasn't someone to mess with. As Prohibition began in 1920, the streets of New York transformed overnight. The nationwide ban on alcohol created massive opportunities for illegal business, and young Siegel saw this as his chance to rise. Together with Lansky, he expanded from petty crime to bootlegging, supplying illegal liquor to speakeasies across the city. They operated with cunning, building networks and forging alliances with other gangs. During this time, Siegel also became associated with several up-and-coming figures who would later dominate American organized crime, people like Charles Lucky Luciano, Frank Costello, and Vito Genovese. These men were not just gangsters, they were visionaries who sought to modernize organized crime, moving away from chaotic street fights toward a more structured, national criminal syndicate. Siegel's reputation grew rapidly. His quick temper and propensity for violence earned him the nickname Bugsy, a slang term implying that someone was crazy or unpredictable. But Siegel despised the nickname, considering it an insult. He preferred to be seen as sharp, composed, and calculating, not merely a hothead. Nonetheless, the name stuck, and even though no one dared call him Bugsy to his face, the world would forever remember him by it. By his early 20s, Siegel had become a key player in New York's underworld. He wasn't just a street enforcer, he was also part of the emerging criminal elite. Alongside Lansky, he helped form Murder Incorporated, a group that would soon act as the enforcement wing of the national crime syndicate. But even before that, he had already made a name for himself as someone who could be trusted to get the job done, no matter how dangerous. An important element of Siegel's early criminal journey was his ability to blend brutality with charm. Unlike many of his contemporaries, he had a good sense of style. He dressed sharply, carried himself with confidence, and could hold his own in high society. This combination made him especially valuable to the mob. He could intimidate with his fists or his gun, but he could also walk into a room full of businessmen and hold a conversation without appearing out of place. In many ways, these early experiences in Brooklyn forged the dual identity that would define Siegel for the rest of his life: the ruthless gangster and the charismatic visionary. He learned how to navigate dangerous alliances, seize opportunities, and build a name in a world where survival depended on cunning and strength. This foundation would eventually lead him to the national stage, where his ambition pushed him beyond New York's crowded streets to the glamour of California and ultimately the deserts of Nevada. But it all began in those cramped Brooklyn neighborhoods, where a young boy decided he would never live like the struggling immigrants around him, and chose a path of power, money, and violence to make that happen. As Benjamin Bugsy Siegel's influence grew on the streets of New York, the criminal underworld itself was also evolving. The 1920s and 1930s marked a turning point in American organized crime. Prohibition had created a vast illegal economy worth millions, and the older, disorganized ethnic gangs of the early 1900s were giving way to a more strategic, business-like criminal syndicate. This transformation would set the stage for one of the most feared and secretive organizations in mob history. Murder Incorporated, and Bugsy Siegel would play a central role in its rise. In the late 1920s, after proving his mettle through bootlegging, extortion, and enforcement work, Siegel became more closely involved with Meyer Lansky and Charles "Lucky" Luciano, two men who envisioned a new kind of underworld. Rather than fighting endless turf wars between rival ethnic gangs, Italians, Jews, Irish, they aimed to create a national crime syndicate, a structured alliance that would manage territory, share profits, and eliminate wasteful conflicts. Siegel, known for his fearlessness and unwavering loyalty to Lansky, became one of the trusted enforcers of this emerging network. To keep this syndicate running smoothly, Luciano and Lansky needed a professional enforcement arm, a group that could carry out assassinations, settle disputes, and maintain discipline, all without drawing unnecessary attention to the leadership. Out of this necessity was born what journalists would later call Murder Incorporated, or Murder Incorporated for short. The group operated out of Brownsville, Brooklyn, and was largely composed of Jewish and Italian hitmen. They were the mob's special operations unit, working in the shadows to ensure order within the sprawling criminal empire. Siegel's reputation made him a natural fit. He was fast, unpredictable, and utterly ruthless when needed. He had already proven himself in the bootlegging wars, where drive-by shootings and bombings were common tools of business. But Murder Incorporated wasn't about reckless violence. It was about precision. Orders were issued from higher up in the syndicate, and the killers were expected to execute hits cleanly, quietly, and without personal involvement. Siegel excelled in this kind of work, where loyalty and efficiency mattered more than anything else. Within Murder Incorporated, Siegel was not merely a foot soldier. His early friendship with Lansky gave him status and access to leadership. He was trusted to handle high-stakes jobs, both enforcing discipline among lower-level criminals and eliminating rivals who threatened syndicate operations. Rumors circulated through underworld circles that Siegel had personally taken part in multiple contract killings, sometimes even volunteering for the most dangerous assignments. While exact numbers remain uncertain, historians and law enforcement reports have linked him to numerous murders during this era. One of the most infamous tasks attributed to Murder Incorporated was carrying out assassinations ordered by Luciano's commission, the governing body of organized crime established in 1931. The commission oversaw disputes and sanctioned killings, ensuring that no single gang could dominate the others unchecked. When a decision was made to remove a threat, Murder Incorporated executed the order. Siegel was part of this machinery, helping to enforce the will of the mob bosses across the country from New York to Chicago. Murder Incorporated operated with a chilling professionalism. Killers were paid fixed fees for each job, often between $1,000 and $5,000, a fortune during the Great Depression. They traveled across state lines, often using aliases and false documents. Their murders were cold, methodical, and efficient, frequently carried out with ice picks, pistols, or strangulation to avoid unnecessary noise. Bodies would be found in alleys, cars, or docks, sending an unmistakable message to anyone who dared cross the syndicate. Siegel, however, brought something different to the organization: a combination of flair and menace. Unlike some of the shadowy assassins who preferred anonymity, Siegel moved between the gritty underworld and the sophisticated social scene of Manhattan. He was seen at nightclubs, dressed impeccably, mingling with celebrities, politicians, and businessmen. But beneath the charming exterior was a man who could pull the trigger without hesitation if the syndicate required it. This duality made him both respected and feared, a figure who represented the deadly efficiency of Murder Incorporated but also its growing ambition. One critical moment that solidified Siegel's role came in the early 1930s when the syndicate targeted Salvatore Maranzano, an old-school Italian boss who refused to accept Luciano's new order. Although Siegel was not the one who killed Maranzano, he was part of the circle that carried out Luciano's purge of the old mafia hierarchy. His involvement in these pivotal power struggles demonstrated that he was no longer just a street-level enforcer. He was now part of the inner mechanism of organized crime. Law enforcement began to take notice of the growing number of unsolved murders linked to this mysterious group. By the late 1930s, authorities finally put a name to it: Murder Incorporated. When prosecutors flipped Abe "Kid Twist" Relis, a key hitman, he spilled details about the group's structure, operations, and personnel. Relis' testimony led to dozens of arrests and convictions. While Siegel was never directly convicted for any Murder Incorporated killings, his name appeared repeatedly in witness statements and investigative reports. He was known as a man who didn't hesitate, someone whose loyalty to Lansky and the syndicate was absolute. What's striking is how this period shaped Siegel's identity. He wasn't just a gangster looking for quick cash anymore. He had become part of something far bigger, a national criminal network that operated like a corporation with hierarchy, rules, and deadly enforcement. Murder Incorporated was his proving ground, a place where his violent instincts were refined into disciplined power. It gave him status, resources, and a reputation that followed him for the rest of his life. By the mid to late 1930s, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel had carved out a powerful place for himself in New York's criminal hierarchy. His name carried weight in both Jewish and Italian mob circles, thanks to his work with Meyer Lansky, Lucky Luciano, and the enforcement arm of the syndicate, Murder Incorporated. But Siegel wasn't content to remain just another figure in the New York underworld. He had always thought bigger than the streets that raised him. It was this ambition, and his eye for opportunity, that would lead him westward to California, a place where crime, celebrity, and glamour could intertwine like nowhere else. At the time, Los Angeles was booming. Hollywood had become the beating heart of the global film industry. The city attracted money, attention, and powerful people. It was a world very different from the crowded tenements and smoky backrooms of New York. And for organized crime, California represented both a lucrative frontier and a strategic base. The mob saw potential in controlling racing wires, which transmitted horse race results, bookmaking, gambling rackets, prostitution rings, and unions within the movie industry. It was largely untouched compared to the East Coast, and whoever moved first could dominate. In the late 1930s, Siegel volunteered, or was strategically chosen, to head west as the syndicate's ambassador to California. His mission was to establish mob operations, oversee existing rackets, build new ones, and form connections with Hollywood's elite. It was a role that suited him perfectly. Unlike many gangsters, Siegel possessed natural charisma. He was impeccably dressed, charming, well-spoken, and had a movie star presence that allowed him to move effortlessly between criminal circles and high society. When Siegel arrived in Los Angeles, he quickly made himself at home in Beverly Hills, renting luxurious homes and throwing extravagant parties that attracted both underworld figures and Hollywood celebrities. His social circle soon included famous actors, producers, and studio executives. He was seen at nightclubs, racetracks, and high-end restaurants, rubbing shoulders with the likes of Clark Gable, Cary Grant, Jean Harlow, and other stars of the Golden Age. He didn't come across as a thug. He came across as a glamorous, dangerous mystery, the kind of figure Hollywood itself might have created. While making these social connections, Siegel simultaneously began laying down the criminal infrastructure the mob needed. One of the most profitable ventures was controlling the wire service, the network that transmitted up-to-the-minute horse race results to bookies. By taking over this system, Siegel and his associates could dictate who got the information, who could book bets, and who paid for access. This effectively gave them control over a major portion of California's illegal gambling operations. Siegel forged alliances with local gangsters, including Jack Dragna, one of Los Angeles's most prominent mob figures. Though tensions existed between New York and LA mobs, Siegel's forceful personality ensured he would not be overshadowed. Another area Siegel targeted was labor racketeering, particularly within Hollywood's powerful film unions. The mob had already infiltrated unions on the East Coast, and California studios presented a massive opportunity. Siegel worked to insert mob influence into these unions, giving the syndicate leverage over studios through strikes, negotiations, and protection. In some cases, movie producers quietly paid mob-linked groups to avoid disruptions in production schedules. Siegel became the intermediary between Hollywood money and underworld muscle, wielding power on both sides. Siegel's lifestyle in California was a dramatic shift from his earlier years. He bought expensive cars, wore designer suits, and lived like the stars he mingled with. But he wasn't merely playing dress-up, he was building a power base. California became his territory, and he was determined to rule it with the same mix of intimidation and sophistication that had made him a star in New York. His reputation as a fearsome enforcer followed him. People knew that behind the charm was a man capable of lethal violence if crossed. Law enforcement too began to take notice. The Los Angeles Police Department and the FBI monitored Siegel closely. His presence was too visible to ignore. But Siegel was clever. He often maintained the appearance of a legitimate businessman, investing in real estate, nightclubs, and legitimate enterprises to mask his criminal activities. He also had a knack for befriending influential politicians, judges, and lawmen, sometimes through genuine charm, other times through bribes and favors. This network of protection helped him operate with relative freedom during his early years in California. Despite his growing empire, Siegel's personality remained volatile. He was known to fly into fits of rage at the slightest insult. Stories circulated of him threatening or beating people who crossed him, even within the glitzy settings of Beverly Hills mansions and exclusive nightclubs. This duality, the elegant gangster and the violent killer, made him both alluring and terrifying to those around him. Hollywood stars admired his confidence and presence, but many also feared him. Siegel also became romantically involved with Virginia Hill, a glamorous woman with ties to organized crime. Hill, originally from Alabama, was a former courier for the Chicago outfit and had a magnetic personality that matched Siegel's intensity. Their relationship would become both passionate and infamous, further blurring the line between criminal operations and Hollywood drama. Together, they became one of the most talked-about couples in California's high society, attending premieres, hosting lavish parties, and living a life of spectacle. California was more than just a side operation for Siegel. It was the launch pad for his greatest ambition. It gave him proximity to wealth, access to powerful figures, and the freedom to operate on a new scale. He was no longer just an enforcer or a hitman. He was becoming a criminal entrepreneur, a man who saw himself not as a gangster hiding in the shadows, but as a powerful figure who could shape entire industries. His activities on the West Coast laid the groundwork for what would come next, a vision that stretched far beyond Hollywood Hills and into the vast, open desert of Nevada. By the mid-1940s, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel had firmly established himself as one of the most influential mob figures on the American West Coast. From his Beverly Hills mansion, he oversaw bookmaking, labor rackets, and gambling operations that stretched from Los Angeles to Mexico. But beneath the surface of his glamorous Hollywood lifestyle, Siegel's ambition was simmering. He was no longer content with controlling rackets behind the scenes. He wanted to build something monumental, something that would outlast him and reshape the criminal landscape. That vision would lead him to a dusty, seemingly insignificant town in the Nevada desert, Las Vegas. At the time, Las Vegas was nothing like the neon empire we know today. It was a quiet railroad stop with a population of just a few thousand people. The main attractions were small casinos, bars, and gas stations along Fremont Street. The desert stretched endlessly beyond the town, silent and empty. But there was one crucial factor that caught the attention of mob figures like Siegel. Gambling was legal in Nevada. Since 1931, the state had legalized casino gaming in an attempt to boost its struggling economy during the Great Depression. For over a decade, this law had been mostly exploited by small-time operators, cowboys, and hustlers. Big organized crime had not yet fully moved in. When Siegel visited Nevada in the early 1940s, he saw something that others missed. While most people dismissed Las Vegas as a dusty pit stop between Los Angeles and Salt Lake City, Siegel imagined a luxury oasis rising from the desert sands, a destination that would attract the rich, the powerful, and the curious. He believed that if the mob could build a resort unlike anything America had ever seen, Las Vegas could become the ultimate playground, a place where gambling, entertainment, and indulgence would merge into one dazzling spectacle. The idea wasn't entirely new. A Los Angeles businessman named Billy Wilkerson, publisher of The Hollywood Reporter, had already started planning a stylish casino resort just outside the city limits. He purchased land along Highway 91, a desolate stretch of road that would later become the Las Vegas Strip, and began designing a modern, European-inspired hotel and casino. His vision included elegant architecture, world-class restaurants, and high-end entertainment. But as construction progressed, Wilkerson ran into financial problems. Wartime restrictions on building materials and limited funds slowed his project to a crawl. This is where Siegel entered the picture. Recognizing both the potential and vulnerability of Wilkerson's project, Siegel leveraged his mob connections and eventually took over the development. Backed by syndicate money from New York and Chicago, he became the face and driving force of the resort. He renamed it the Flamingo Hotel, after the nickname of his glamorous girlfriend, Virginia Hill. To Siegel, the Flamingo wasn't just another casino, it was a statement, a bold declaration that organized crime could move beyond smoky backrooms and dingy gambling halls to create something elegant, profitable, and enduring. Siegel envisioned a hotel that rivaled the most luxurious resorts in Europe. He demanded the best of everything: imported Italian marble, custom furniture, elaborate lighting fixtures, and lush gardens that defied the desert environment. He wanted Hollywood stars to flock there, not just gamblers. His idea was to create a place where the nation's elite could gamble, drink, dine, and be entertained, all under one roof. This was a radical concept at the time. Most casinos were modest, functional spaces. Siegel was dreaming of a palace in the desert. However, this grand vision came with staggering costs. What began as a $1 million project quickly ballooned to $4 million, then $6 million, a fortune in the 1940s. Siegel's obsession with perfection led to constant redesigns and delays. He fired contractors, replaced materials, and imported luxury items despite wartime shortages. Every detail had to match his mental image of the Flamingo's future glory. He even flew in designers from Los Angeles to ensure the hotel had a sophisticated, modern look unlike anything else in Nevada. As Siegel poured money and energy into the project, he spoke passionately to his mob partners about the future of Las Vegas. He described how the desert could become a gold mine, with luxury casinos lining the highway, attracting crowds from across the country. He believed that once the Flamingo opened and succeeded, others would follow, and Las Vegas would become the gambling capital of America. His enthusiasm was contagious, and for a time the syndicate supported his vision, providing funds through secret channels. Beyond the business potential, Las Vegas appealed to Siegel for another reason: control. In Los Angeles, he had to navigate complex networks of existing gangs, law enforcement, and studio politics. But in the Nevada desert, he saw a blank canvas. With enough money and muscle, he could build his own kingdom. He forged relationships with local officials, handed out bribes generously, and ensured that his operations would face minimal interference. He also appreciated Nevada's lax regulatory environment. Law enforcement in Las Vegas was sparse, and state officials were eager to welcome investment, even if they suspected its origins. Siegel spent more and more time in Las Vegas overseeing construction, often arriving in a caravan of luxury vehicles with Virginia Hill by his side. He stayed in lavish suites, entertained visitors from Hollywood and the mob, and walked through the unfinished casino like a man inspecting his empire. Those who met him during this period described him as intense, focused, and almost obsessive about the project. He would boast to friends and associates that the Flamingo would be the finest hotel in the country, the West's answer to Monte Carlo. But while Siegel dreamed, the mob was watching. His syndicate partners expected profits, not endless construction delays and rising expenses. They admired his vision but grew uneasy about the mounting costs and rumors that Siegel and Hill might be skimming money. Still, at this stage, Siegel remained confident and charismatic, convinced that once the Flamingo opened, the flood of profits would silence all doubts. Las Vegas, in Siegel's eyes, was the future, a place where crime could evolve into a legitimate-looking empire under the desert sun. The Flamingo would be the first step, a shining beacon that would transform a forgotten town into a global symbol of luxury, risk, and excess. Once Benjamin Bugsy Siegel secured control of Billy Wilkerson's partially developed casino project, his focus turned entirely to building what he believed would be the most luxurious resort in America. For Siegel, the Flamingo Hotel was not just a business venture. It was a personal monument, a physical expression of his ambition, charisma, and desire to reshape the Underworld's image. But turning a dream into reality in the middle of the Nevada desert proved far more complicated than anyone, including Siegel himself, had anticipated. When Siegel took over the project in 1945, Construction on the site along Highway 91 had barely progressed. The desert heat was relentless, materials were scarce because of post-World War II shortages, and Wilkerson's original funds had run dry. But Siegel didn't see obstacles, he saw potential. He immediately began expanding the original plans, envisioning a resort that would outshine anything on the East Coast or in Europe. Where Wilkerson had dreamed of elegance, Siegel imagined spectacle. The Flamingo was to feature luxury hotel rooms, a casino floor unlike any other, fine dining, high-end shops, manicured gardens, and a lavish pool area. Siegel wanted every corner of the property to exude wealth and sophistication. He personally reviewed architectural drawings, rejected cheaper materials, and insisted on importing expensive stone, tile, and fixtures from across the country and overseas. The desert, he declared, would not dictate the quality of his hotel. His vision would. To bring this ambitious project to life, Siegel tapped into his powerful network. Mob money from New York, Chicago, and other cities flowed into Las Vegas to fund construction. Officially, the project was handled by the Flamingo Hotel Company, but everyone in the underworld knew this was a syndicate operation. Siegel acted as the public face, the man with the charisma to attract celebrities and investors. But behind the scenes he was accountable to some of the most dangerous figures in organized crime. They expected results, not excuses. Almost immediately the project ran into cost overruns. What had started as an estimated $1 million build ballooned quickly. Siegel's constant design changes were partly to blame. He would frequently fire contractors, hire new ones, or halt work to change details he no longer liked. If a material didn't meet his standards, he ordered it replaced, no matter the cost. He imported Italian marble, specialized plumbing fixtures, ornate chandeliers, and top-quality flooring. His demands transformed what was supposed to be a high-class casino into a lavish architectural experiment in the middle of nowhere. Compounding these challenges were logistical problems. Las Vegas was isolated. Transporting materials from Los Angeles or other cities took time and money. Skilled labor was scarce in the desert, forcing Siegel to pay premium rates to bring in experienced workers. On top of that, there were reports of embezzlement and kickbacks among contractors. Some construction crews allegedly inflated costs, confident that Siegel's syndicate money would cover any shortfall. These shady practices only deepened the financial hole. Throughout construction, Siegel became increasingly hands-on and volatile. Workers and managers described him as both charming and terrifying. One moment he might walk the site in an elegant suit, talking excitedly about the Flamingo's future. The next he would explode in rage over a minor setback, threatening workers or drawing his pistol to make a point. His intensity drove progress, but it also created fear and instability. People understood that this was not a typical construction project. It was Siegel's empire in the making, and failure was not an option. As months turned into years, the syndicate's patience wore thin. Costs kept climbing. First $2 million, then $4 million, then $6 million. Every additional dollar meant more pressure on Siegel to deliver a profitable resort. Mob leaders began to question where the money was going. Rumors circulated that Siegel and his girlfriend, Virginia Hill, were siphoning funds to offshore accounts in Switzerland. Whether true or not, the perception that money was disappearing made syndicate leaders nervous. Hill frequently traveled between the US and Europe during this time, and these trips only fueled suspicion. Meanwhile, Siegel was determined to make the Flamingo the premier destination for Hollywood's elite. He leveraged his social connections in California, inviting movie stars, producers, and wealthy businessmen to invest in or visit the resort. He promised them something they had never experienced: a glamorous casino hotel in the desert, where privacy and indulgence were guaranteed. He believed the Flamingo would attract not just gamblers but celebrities, politicians, and high rollers from across the country. By late 1946, despite ongoing construction problems, Siegel faced mounting pressure to open. The syndicate wanted to see some return on their investment. Against the advice of some of his team, Siegel decided to launch the Flamingo before it was fully finished, hoping the grand opening would bring in enough revenue to ease concerns. He set the date for December 26, 1946, aiming to coincide with the holiday season and attract a glamorous crowd. In the weeks leading up to the opening, Siegel poured enormous effort into marketing and preparation. He brought in top entertainers including Jimmy Durante and Xavier Cugat to perform at the Flamingo's showroom. He wanted guests to experience luxury the moment they walked through the doors. But behind the glitz, workers scrambled to finish key parts of the hotel. Many guest rooms were incomplete, landscaping remained unfinished, and several areas were still under construction. When opening night finally arrived, the Flamingo hosted a glittering crowd of Hollywood stars, mob figures and curious high rollers. But the event, which Siegel envisioned as a triumphant debut, quickly turned chaotic. A heavy rainstorm hit Las Vegas that evening, turning the surrounding desert roads into muddy obstacles and discouraging many invited guests from attending. Inside, the casino struggled with technical issues, unfinished rooms meant some guests had nowhere to stay, and revenues fell far short of expectations. The grand opening of the Flamingo ended up highlighting the gaps between Siegel's vision and reality. While the hotel did showcase elegance and innovation, it was not ready to operate at full capacity. The mob's investment remained tied up in an unfinished property, and their star frontman was now under immense scrutiny. The project that was supposed to cement Siegel's legacy was increasingly looking like a financial black hole. As the Flamingo Hotel's construction dragged on and costs spiraled out of control, Benjamin Bugsy Siegel found himself caught in a tightening vice between his lavish ambitions and the ruthless expectations of the criminal syndicate backing him. In the underworld, trust was currency. Once that trust cracked, even the most feared gangster could find himself in grave danger. When Siegel first presented the Flamingo project to his mob associates, he promised a relatively straightforward investment, about $1 million to build a luxury resort that would start turning profits almost immediately. But as construction went on, that figure became a distant memory. By the end of 1946, cost estimates had soared past $6 million, an astronomical number at the time. To put that into perspective, the Flamingo's budget was larger than some Hollywood film productions of the era and far beyond anything Las Vegas had ever seen. The syndicate's financial network had been funneling money from multiple sources, New York, Chicago, Cleveland, and elsewhere, into the project. At first, there was excitement. The idea of planting organized crime's flag in Las Vegas, far away from the prying eyes of East Coast law enforcement, was appealing. It promised clean profits from gambling, entertainment, and hospitality. But as the project became a bottomless pit, the tone in the syndicate's boardrooms shifted from enthusiasm to suspicion. One of the major factors behind the skyrocketing costs was Siegel's perfectionism and impulsive decision-making. He frequently demanded design changes after work had already been completed, forcing crews to tear down and rebuild sections of the hotel at immense expense. He rejected cheaper materials in favor of costly imported ones, and he spent freely on luxuries that had little to do with functionality. Each change pushed the budget higher, and Siegel's casual attitude toward accounting made it difficult to track where all the money was going. Meanwhile, there were persistent rumors of embezzlement. Many in the syndicate began to suspect that Siegel, and perhaps more dangerously his girlfriend Virginia Hill, were siphoning off funds. Hill's frequent trips to Europe, particularly Switzerland, fueled these suspicions. In the 1940s, Swiss bank accounts were known safe havens for secret deposits. Though definitive proof was elusive, perception was everything. And the perception was that money meant for construction was disappearing. The mob was not a traditional business, but it had its own form of internal accountability. When someone was trusted with millions, they were expected to produce results. Failure was tolerated only if it could be explained. In Siegel's case, the numbers no longer added up. Meyer Lansky, one of Siegel's oldest friends and a key figure in the syndicate, found himself in the uncomfortable position of mediating between Bugsy and increasingly angry mob investors. Lansky had vouched for Siegel, and now his reputation was also at stake. In private meetings across the country, mob leaders debated their options. Some argued that Siegel's vision for the Flamingo was ahead of its time and deserved patience. Others saw only a man who was recklessly burning through their money while living like a Hollywood celebrity. Siegel's flamboyant lifestyle, lavish parties, expensive clothes, flashy cars, did little to ease their concerns. To them, it looked like he was enjoying their investment instead of protecting it. The Flamingo's disastrous opening night in December 1946 added fuel to the fire. Rather than generating profits, the event exposed how unfinished and disorganized the hotel still was. Bad weather, construction delays, and low turnout meant the Flamingo operated at a loss from day one. Instead of cashing in, Siegel had to temporarily close the hotel in early 1947 to complete more work. This closure required even more money, pushing total expenditures higher still. Investors who had already poured in millions were now being asked to put up additional cash just to keep the project alive. Behind the scenes, mob accountants and enforcers began auditing every aspect of the Flamingo's finances. They combed through ledgers, invoices, and payment records, looking for evidence of theft or mismanagement. What they found only deepened their suspicions. Incomplete records, unaccounted expenses, and inflated costs. Some contractors were believed to be skimming. Others were allegedly paying kickbacks to middlemen. Whether Siegel personally profited from these schemes remains debated by historians, but his lack of financial discipline made him an easy target for blame. As word of the budget disaster spread through mob circles, resentment toward Siegel hardened. This was not a group that tolerated embarrassment. For years, Siegel had cultivated a reputation as a smooth, fearless operator, a man who could handle business and keep his partners happy. But the Flamingo saga painted a different picture, one of recklessness, arrogance, and possibly betrayal. His Hollywood socialite lifestyle, once an asset, now seemed like a liability. Meyer Lansky did his best to protect his friend. He argued to other syndicate members that once construction was complete, the Flamingo would eventually generate huge profits. He believed Las Vegas had a future as a gambling mecca, and Siegel's vision, while expensive, might still pay off. But not everyone shared his patience. Figures from Chicago and Cleveland, less personally attached to Siegel, were especially vocal in demanding accountability. They wanted answers, and potentially blood. As pressure mounted, Siegel responded the only way he knew how, with bravado. He downplayed the financial chaos, insisting that the Flamingo would soon be a gold mine. He told mob leaders that once the doors fully reopened, the hotel would attract high rollers from Los Angeles, celebrities from Hollywood, and gamblers from across the country. His charisma and confidence temporarily kept some critics at bay, but the numbers didn't lie. The Flamingo was millions over budget and months behind schedule. Mob leaders began holding closed-door meetings without Siegel present, a clear sign that his status had weakened. Reports circulated that they were considering removing him from the project entirely. But in the criminal world, removal could mean far more than losing a job. When millions of dollars vanished and reputations were on the line, the consequences could be fatal. By mid-1947, the Flamingo was operational and starting to bring in revenue, but the damage to Siegel's reputation was already done. The syndicate had lost faith in his ability to manage the project. The very resort he had dreamed of as his crowning achievement had become a source of frustration, suspicion, and anger among the most dangerous men in America. And in their world, unresolved anger rarely faded quietly. By 1947, the Flamingo Hotel was finally up and running, but the cracks in Benjamin Bugsy Siegel's empire were too deep to ignore. Behind the shimmering neon lights of Las Vegas' new crown jewel, the mob's patience had reached its breaking point. Years of cost overruns, unaccounted funds, and delays had transformed Siegel from a trusted partner to a liability, and in the brutal world of organized crime, liabilities rarely lasted long. For a brief moment, it seemed Siegel might turn things around. After the hotel's temporary closure in early 1947, crews rushed to complete unfinished rooms, landscaping, and infrastructure. When the Flamingo reopened in March 1947, operations began to stabilize. Guests from California and beyond flocked to the desert resort, drawn by its reputation for glamour and celebrity. Revenue finally started flowing in. For the first time since construction began, the Flamingo was showing signs of profitability. But by then, the mob's trust had already eroded. The syndicate wasn't just looking at short-term profits. They were looking at the millions of dollars that had disappeared during construction. Internal investigations had turned up messy records, inflated expenses, and a trail of suspicious payments. Whether or not Siegel had personally stolen money almost didn't matter anymore. In the eyes of many mob investors, the Flamingo represented a massive betrayal. It wasn't just about the hotel, it was about honor, control, and discipline within the syndicate. Meyer Lansky, Siegel's oldest ally, continued to defend him passionately. Lansky argued that killing Siegel would not bring the money back and could destabilize the mob's presence in Las Vegas. He believed the Flamingo would eventually become the money-making machine they had all hoped for. But his arguments fell on deaf ears among other powerful figures, particularly those from Chicago and Cleveland, who were far less sentimental. They saw a man who had mismanaged their investment and embarrassed them on a national scale. In their world, embarrassment could be deadly. Meanwhile, Siegel remained confident, perhaps overly so. He believed his status, his friendship with Lansky, and his reputation as a fearless operator would protect him. He was still living lavishly, moving between Los Angeles and Las Vegas, entertaining Hollywood elites, and enjoying the fruits of a lifestyle that few gangsters ever experienced so openly. But beneath the surface, a silent verdict was being reached. Sometime in mid-1947, Syndicate leaders gathered privately to discuss Siegel's fate. The meeting was not about construction schedules or profit projections anymore. It was about whether Bugsy lived or died. Testimonies from mob insiders suggest that the decision was made collectively, in typical mafia fashion. Unemotional, pragmatic, and final. Lansky reportedly tried to save his friend one last time, but the majority had decided. They believed Siegel's mismanagement and suspected theft had crossed an unforgivable line. The hit was planned carefully. Killing Bugsy Siegel would not be done impulsively or in the heat of anger. It had to send a clear message to anyone else in the organization who might mishandle syndicate money. On the night of June 20, 1947, Siegel was staying at the Beverly Hills mansion of his girlfriend, Virginia Hill, though Hill herself was away in Europe at the time. Siegel spent the evening lounging in the living room with his associate Alan Smiley, seemingly unaware that his final moments were approaching. At around 10:45 p.m., as Siegel sat on a couch reading the Los Angeles Times, a gunman positioned outside the mansion's window took aim with a .30 caliber M1 carbine rifle. The shooter fired multiple rounds through the window in rapid succession. 9 bullets tore through the room. 2 struck Siegel directly, one hitting his head near the right eye and the other his torso. The headshot was devastating, killing him instantly. Glass shattered, furniture splintered, and Siegel's body collapsed against the sofa. The once dazzling gangster who had dreamed of transforming Las Vegas into a playground of the rich and powerful died in an instant, under a barrage of gunfire in a quiet Beverly Hills neighborhood. The aftermath was swift and telling. Within minutes of Siegel's death, news began circulating through mob channels. By the following morning, Mo Sedway and Gus Greenbaum, trusted Chicago outfit associates, walked into the Flamingo Hotel and assumed control. There was no chaos, no struggle for power, no delay. The syndicate had planned everything meticulously. Siegel's death was not just an execution, it was a transfer of authority, executed with corporate precision. Police arrived at the Beverly Hills mansion to find a gruesome scene that would become one of the most infamous mob murders in American history. Photographs of Siegel's lifeless body with the fatal head wound quickly made headlines. The killing was shocking to the public, but within the criminal underworld, it was understood as an expected outcome. In their view, Siegel had violated the unspoken rules. You could take risks, you could build empires, but you could never lose the syndicate's money without consequences. The identity of the shooter has remained a mystery for decades. Various theories point to different suspects, ranging from mob hitmen from Chicago to personal associates seeking favor, but no one was ever officially charged. What mattered to the mob was not who pulled the trigger, but that the message was delivered. No one, not even Benjamin Bugsy Siegel, was untouchable. Ironically, after Siegel's death, the Flamingo began to thrive. Under Sedway and Greenbaum's management, the hotel finally turned into the profit machine the mob had envisioned. The groundwork Siegel had laid, the glamour, the luxury, the connection to Hollywood, was real. But he never lived to see it succeed. His vision transformed Las Vegas, but his reckless ambition and inability to navigate the ruthless discipline of the mob sealed his fate. The fall of Bugsy Siegel stands as one of the most dramatic power shifts in organized crime history. It wasn't a street shootout, a police raid, or a betrayal in a dark alley. It was a calculated decision made in boardrooms, by men who valued control and money above friendship or loyalty. Siegel had built the Flamingo with dreams of becoming a legitimate tycoon. In the end, he was brought down by the very organization that made his dream possible. In the wake of Benjamin Bugsy Siegel's violent death in June 1947, the Flamingo Hotel did not falter, it flourished. The mob's swift replacement of Siegel with Mo Sedway and Gus Greenbaum marked the beginning of a new, more disciplined era for Las Vegas. The story of what came next reveals how Siegel's vision outlived him, shaping not only the future of the Flamingo but the entire identity of Las Vegas as a global entertainment capital. The Flamingo under Sedway and Greenbaum became everything the mob had hoped for when they first agreed to fund the project. With construction complete and operations streamlined, the hotel finally began to generate consistent profits. The luxury that Siegel had insisted upon, the imported marble floors, elegant decor, glamorous showrooms, and lush landscaping, created an atmosphere unlike anything in the American West at the time. Visitors who stepped through its doors felt as if they were entering a world of elegance and indulgence, far removed from the dusty Nevada desert just outside. Sedway and Greenbaum, unlike Siegel, were methodical businessmen. They focused less on glamour and more on efficiency and profitability. Accounting was tightened. Operations were standardized. Contracts were stabilized. In just a few months, The Flamingo transformed from a financial disaster into a model of mob-run efficiency. Revenue soared, attracting gamblers, celebrities, and curious tourists alike. This turnaround not only vindicated the syndicate's faith in Las Vegas but also cemented the city's reputation as a serious gambling destination. Ironically, the foundations of this success were built by Siegel himself. He was the one who had the audacity to imagine a palace in the desert, a resort that would rival the glamour of Hollywood and Monte Carlo. He pushed the boundaries of design and marketing, bringing in stars, luxury, and spectacle. His perfectionism, though financially disastrous during construction, created a property that dazzled guests. The mob may have taken control after his death, but the blueprint they followed was undeniably Siegel's. In the years following Siegel's assassination, the Flamingo became the template for future resorts. Other organized crime families and independent investors saw its success and began to develop their own properties along Highway 91, later known as the Las Vegas Strip. One by one, hotels and casinos rose out of the desert: the Sahara, the Sands, the Riviera, the Tropicana. Each drew inspiration from the Flamingo's blend of luxury, entertainment, and gambling. What Siegel had sparked became an unstoppable wave of development. By the 1950s, Las Vegas was rapidly transforming. Neon lights illuminated the night sky. Top entertainers from across the country performed in lavish showrooms. High rollers flew in from Hollywood and New York to gamble and be seen. And behind the glitz, organized crime quietly reaped the rewards. Syndicate money flowed through the casinos, laundered through legitimate businesses, and skimmed before tax collectors could take their share. The city became both a playground for the rich and a financial engine for the mob. Benjamin Siegel's legacy in Las Vegas is complex. On one hand, he was a gangster, a man with a violent history tied to bootlegging, murder, and racketeering. His life was filled with crime, ruthlessness, and moral ambiguity. On the other hand, he was a visionary who saw potential in a dusty stretch of highway where few others did. He believed that Las Vegas could be transformed into a luxurious oasis, and he was willing to gamble everything, including his life, on that vision. His story became legendary in American culture. Newspapers across the country reported on his assassination with sensational headlines, framing him as both a glamorous figure and a cautionary tale. Over time, Hollywood would immortalize him in films, books, and television shows. He became a mythic figure, the gangster who dreamed big and died violently, a man who built a paradise he would never rule. The Flamingo, the hotel he imagined, stood as a permanent monument to both his ambition and his downfall. For the mob, Siegel's death was both a warning and an opportunity. It reminded everyone that syndicate money came with unbreakable rules. Mismanagement, whether real or perceived, could cost your life. At the same time, his project proved that legitimate business and organized crime could merge profitably. The Flamingo's success encouraged further investment from crime families across the country. Las Vegas became the crown jewel of mob enterprise, generating vast sums of money throughout the 1950s and 1960s. As decades passed, corporate interests eventually replaced mob control, and Las Vegas evolved into the entertainment capital of the world, attracting millions of tourists annually. But the seed of that transformation was planted in the mid-1940s by Bugsy Siegel's daring experiment. Without his vision, the Las Vegas Strip might have remained a minor gambling outpost rather than the iconic global destination it is today. Today, the original Flamingo has been rebuilt and modernized, but its name and location remain unchanged. Visitors walking through the Flamingo can still find echoes of Siegel's original dream, in the pink neon, the opulent atmosphere, and the sense that Las Vegas is a place where glamour and danger, ambition and risk intertwine. Statues, plaques, and historical tours in the city acknowledge his role. He is remembered not simply as a gangster, but as a founding architect of modern Las Vegas. His legacy is a paradox. He died violently, betrayed by the very syndicate he helped enrich. Yet his dream thrived, expanded, and reshaped a city forever. The mob may have reaped the profits, corporations may have inherited the empire, but Bugsy Siegel's fingerprints remain on every neon-lit boulevard of Las Vegas. In death, he became larger than life, a symbol of how ambition, vision, and criminal enterprise converged to build something far bigger than one man.